If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.
Hello and welcome to the Rich as Fuck podcast, the show where we talk about money, life, investing, and all things in between. Today, I have the honor of having my little brother on the show. He's an accountant, kind of. I actually don't know what he does anymore, in Amsterdam. He's the reason my dad said, always wear condoms. He's the one that always makes me look like the better brother. And everyone's favorite ginger, welcome, Stefan.
Thank you very much for having me today, Charlie Patat. I am completely honored.
Well, as many of you can realize, we are actually both Afrikaans, but for the sake of the people and for the editor, we will be conducting this interview in English. Even though you are now pretty much Dutch, are we okay to proceed in the British tongue?
That is agreed upon. Good.
Okay, fantastic. Well, today's going to be probably pretty raw, very unscripted compared to how the normal podcasts go, but we wouldn't have it any other way.
No.
So yeah, let's unleash. Firstly, honorary shout out to two people that's probably listening. Mom, Dad, how's it? Look, we made it. And Stefan, let me start with this. How did you see our upbringing? And how did that lead to your financial mindset today?
That's a good one. I think it's quite logical to think that we were raised in sort of a standard middle class upbringing, meaning sort of humble beginnings, but we also had everything we need. And extra. I mean, our parents provided for us. Also in a middle class to rich suburb as well in Pretoria. So, there was a bit of, at least for myself, a bit of comparison when you go sleep over at friends. Sometimes I'm like, oh, they've got it really good, but we're not comparing to them as we are further than they are now, right? No, that's a joke. And then I think also to add on to that is our financial journey there started quite early, at least for myself. And you are now the renowned king of, as you call yourself, the yachting investor. But I think I actually started saving and I was quite frugal from the outset, from the start when I was younger. And a good example of this would be to think back when there was a shopping center where we usually go to restaurants. And my friend and I would go and pick up coins underneath the deck and save it. And I was also always so intrigued because I could gather these coins and then I could go to this crystal shop where I would buy a crystal. And I think it was just the fundamentals of that and mixed with the humble beginnings that we had as children and also the studies and everything we were lucky enough to do, which brought us here because, like I said, middle class, but we also had one chance, right? That was made clear from the start. And I think we took that into our own stride and made us to at least took us to where we are now. So that's good. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right about the comparison thing. And it's interesting because when we were younger, you're pretty naive about, especially the country we actually grew up in. Yes, we were middle class in our peers, but if you zoom out and look at South Africa's economy as a landscape, we were probably the top 1 or 2% because of the mass poverty happening there. So even though to us it felt middle class relatively within the country, I think we were very blessed. And like you said, we were never like extravagantly spoiled or whatever, but we definitely never went to bed hungry. Most of the time when we wanted something, we got it. And as a child, you're not always that appreciative of what your parents put in until now that we are adults and we are paying for real life shit. You're like, okay, having kids is not cheap. And then you took me down memory lane there with the shopping center where we used to go play around in Greenland. And not only did you go under the deck to pick up coins, but you also frequently stole koi fish and sold it And we both dabbled in the illegal bonsai trade for pocket money. So there's ways to be creative and to get cash flow when you're younger. And I think both our parents will laugh at these statements.
And who knows what those small amounts added up to during the decades, right?
Yeah.
We won't go into too much detail about compounding today, but yeah, indeed. Sorry about that, Greenland. We will pay back. Nice.
It's also, you're right in saying that I think you were definitely a bit more naturally inclined and like prepositioned towards frugality and saving and investing at a younger age. I think because it wasn't my money, it was like our parents' money that we got pocket money. I didn't really care too much. But the moment I started like working side jobs while I was studying, like cricket coach or waiter or starting the events company back in Pretoria, like when it became my hard-earned money and my blood, sweat and tears, you're like, okay, we got to be slightly more fiscally responsible. And then when I moved into yachting, I went from barely scraping by to making a fairly good living. Also, fun fact to our listeners today, Stefan, in 2018, when I made the decision to become a yachty, he bet me, what was the amount? I don't want to lie on air.
I think it was around 1,000 rand. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think you said 1,000 rand, which is like, $60, whatever, at the current exchange rate, that I will not succeed and that I will be back within a few months back to coaching cricket or some derogatory statement. I obviously won. 8 years later, I successfully retired from my life at sea.
And I believe there's not a single cent received. So what that probably means is I need to pick up my phone here somewhere after this, and I have your Revolut details. Yes. You will be getting those cents from me, right? So that's perfect. No, fair enough. That is principles, and those are the important money principles we learn. Yeah.
It truly is. A deal is a deal. And then the transition from us finishing university, I think we both had a pretty privileged university. Like we went to a very good university in South Africa. We went to a fantastic hostel, shout out Mupani. And we had a really big time. A great time. We were entrenched in all the activities. We really lived the full college, uni, frat life, what they call it in the US. After that, life becomes real and we start working and we have to start looking for jobs. So how did your financial journey start looking once you became independent?
Yeah, I think just like yourself, my perception changed from how I saw money, and with end goal in mind already. I think from a young age, I thought to myself, in a world where we are filled with many problems and challenges, I'm going to make sure money isn't one of them, right? Partially of our socio-economic situation in South Africa, but more so because I started falling in love with the process. And not just that, the principles behind that. Small example, I'm flying in 2 weeks back to South Africa. I can fly a direct KLM flight for 1,000. I took a one stop, flight scanner, checked it out, half the price for one stop, because that's where the whole concept of lifestyle prep comes in, and we can touch on that a bit later. And also, end goal in mind is my financially independent, retire early. And it's not to say that I want to, retire early. I want to put emphasis on the being financially independent part, because once I would hope in my 40s, whatever, I don't want to really put a strict figure on that, but once you're not reliant on a job to keep you going, and you have that flexibility and leverage more so, in which you can take a risk, I think that's actually quite freeing. I'm not there now, so we are working towards that goal. And as much as we're focusing on goals, I think it should be the process and not the end goal in mind, because I've seen in my own life, whenever I achieve a goal, I want to have 50K euros in the bank. I've achieved that. What now? So I think it's really falling in love with the process. And I think that's shaped my way of seeing finance. And I must say that you are also a role model in there, because I need to reiterate in school you were awful.
Yeah, I was.
You were financially illiterate, if I may say on air. But it's changed completely, and I've seen the benefits that it's reaped for yourself, where you're in a comfortable position in life and remaining humble as of now, for now, and hopefully for the future in doing so. So, so kudos to you on that, brother.
Cheers, cheers. And yeah, I really like that answer. Normally people on the podcast don't really ever speak about the process. They always talk about, you know, an X amount. But as you alluded to earlier, if you make a goal, like an arbitrary goal, an attainable goal, which is like 50K in the bank, once that happens, excuse the blur, I'm still here. Once that happens, you immediately move the goalposts, right? And now suddenly you go look at, now you move to 100K and then you move to 200K. But if you never educate yourself or nurture those appreciation muscles, I call it, during the process of stopping and being like, oh, wow, okay, we made it here. Are we going to now quickly stop and breathe and evaluate and be grateful? Or are we just going to move on to the next? And effectively, even though you are chasing financial freedom, you are booking yourself into the rat race of all rat races. So a few things I do to navigate that is either stop and do like an appreciation exercise, like literally, not to sound woohoo, but like meditate or be like 5 minutes of being still. I live here in the beautiful mountains now in California. Just walk outside and be like, Mama, we made it, at least for now, at least to where I wanted to make it by the age of 29. And otherwise treat yourself, because that's something that it's so conflicting, because I live in an industry where treat yourself is unfortunately the main mantra, and that's all everyone fucking does all the time. But me, I struggle with that. And I often find that money flows freely towards helping other people or investing, but I'm actually being pretty cheap with myself. And that's not always okay, because one of my favorite books on finance and this whole topic is called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. And he keeps on talking about how you literally can get hit by a bus tomorrow. And you want to effectively die with zero. And I don't think he necessarily means the dollar amounts in your bank account, but it's with zero regrets. So whether that means for people that have children, maybe don't bank on leaving everything to them after you die. Maybe start giving it to them so you can enjoy stuff together while you're still alive. That's something that Carly and I have spoken about and we would like to do one day. But it's a very important part of enjoying the process, is actually stopping and enjoying the fruits of our labor.
Exactly.
It's daunting at times. You know that I've just made like a massive life decision and have stepped out of my career at sea. Whether it's permanent, whether it's for the time being, I'm not quite sure yet. But it's a big step, and it's a very real reality check to go from living on a boat, not paying rent, not paying tax, not paying food, not even buying fucking toilet paper.
Might I add, this is after a massive wedding, which was awesome 2 months ago, and so that indeed that is massive steps.
It is, and it's scary, and it's like I go to the grocery store to buy 2 little bags worth of groceries, and I walk out of here and it's $150 later, and you're like, "Ma bro, is that how much it costs to feed the man?" And it's scary, but luckily I was not an idiot during my yachting journey, which unfortunately a lot of yachties are. And to those of you listening, don't hate me. It's purely, we aren't educated enough, and a lot of us get dropped into a career with high earnings and low expenses with fuck all preparation. So that's actually a perfect segue into what I want to talk about next. So Stefan, I'm going to do a case study experiment with you now. So know, as a landlugger living in a high-tax, pretty regulated economic environment, which is the Netherlands, you know that, I don't even know what you get paid, but let's say you earn 5,000 euros a month in your occupation. You are likely only seeing maybe 1,500, like 1,500 of that at the end of the month after all the bullshit?
Yeah, I would say about 60% you keep over. Same in South Africa, by the way, and the Netherlands is a high tax country as well. But that's the scenario, right? I think I know where you're getting to. You say if I'm in a scenario where I would be living on the yachts with the same amount, but you obviously your take home is your brutto equals your netto, quite literally, without the costs of rent, food, activities, all of that. How would I actually spend that? Is that where you were getting to?
That is indeed the question. How would you spend 5,000 euros a month with zero living expenses if you were a yachty?
I think, let me just write this out, but just quickly.
The tism is at play.
Let's say, for example, 5K on the yacht, which is quite reasonable, by the way, for meteor salary as a mid-senior in a country like Europe. So that's already a good starting point to bank from. I would already, if your investing journey starting now, would throw 50% in the stock market. And once again, this is not financial advice. This is my own.
Thank you.
Own portfolio, because it actually reflects my portfolio spread as is at the moment a bit. But once again, time in the market and not timing, and the principles will stay the same. So I would say 50% in stocks, of which that 50% just go old school S&P 500. Because you probably will be relatively young in your career and therefore age, I would assume. I would say go a bit aggressive with the other 50%, but also it is quite wonky, the stock market at the moment, but speculative stocks a quarter, and then the other quarter of that in, for example, your Magnificent Seven. Also, caveat there is everything I say now to fill up your 50% stock portfolio is more or less US based. And also be careful of that, because last year I'm also mostly exposed to US stocks because they are performing extremely well and they are less prone to the bureaucracy which you're facing in Europe, etc. And there's lots of innovation going on. But if you were to, for example, earn 20% on the S&P last year, you would have lost that actually in essence again due to currency fluctuations. So also keep that into account. That is the 50% on the stock market. Would say 30% cash. Cash in some cases are king, and that includes your emergency buffer. Also, just be wary of where you invest your cash in a savings account. In Europe, you can, according to me, get max 3%. And in US, I think it's 5%. But you have to ask yourself, is that actually beating inflation? But have a good cash reserve, always good. 15%, okay, 5%, dabble a bit with crypto. I'd say that as a time of the recording, crypto has gone down a lot. So I would also say dabble a bit with crypto. I would have said something else 1 year ago, but my opinion has changed. And the last 15% is for general spending, which actually means it's about around, if I say 15% on 5K is around $600, $700, $800 or euros per month. It might sound little to you, but what do you actually need? For myself, living on land, there's a lot of things going on, rent and food and a lot of taxes, as you know, but also for activity, right? I love, and once again, that's the balance we need to strike. But an activity like a rock show in a weekend, fine, great.
Yeah.
Traveling, and this is once again personal preference. Those are things which I don't hold back on. Yeah. But you said something great, Charl. Save mercifully on the things you don't need, but what was that saying again?
So it's actually, I can't claim that, but it's from Ramit Sethi from the book I Will Teach You to Be Rich. So he says, in terms of spending, we got to be very aware on what we spend. So cut mercilessly on the things you don't care about and spend extravagantly on the things you do. So I know even since we were little, you've always loved music and you love rock shows. So you go to Fezzies all the time. You drop countless thousands of euros on all sorts during a festival, I'm sure. And that's fine. But you, like me, you don't really value designer clothes or fancy dinners or anything like that. So there's no need for you to spend money on those line items.
Exactly.
So, yeah, just being mindful about what you're spending your hard-earned cash on.
Yeah, exactly.
I liked your answer on the portfolio allocation. Some people that are quite new to investing and stuff, they might be pretty uncertain when you talk about, what is a speculative asset? What do you mean by individual stocks?
Yeah.
So let's kind of dumb that down and double click a little. So we'll take your $5,000 again.
Yeah.
Or 5,000 euros, and we'll break that up 50% into low-cost index fund, and that will be something like VOO is the ticker on the stock exchanges, for example. Once again, listeners, this is not financial advice. This is just Stefan's recommendation for his portfolio. And then the other 50%, quickly give us a bit more detailed rundown.
Yeah, so 50% stocks and then 30% cash, clean cash, but interest bearing as well. Don't just leave it in your bank. Don't do that ever. I could never see, maybe someone's financial situation differs or background. It's fine, but a credit card, never understood it, never will. That's okay, right? And around 5% on crypto, I said. And really, it's 15% on actual spendings. That would be my ideal month on a yacht.
Yeah, and that aligns really perfectly, because since day one when I was a decky, I was very strict. I saved between 75 and 90% of my paycheck every month, which alludes to, about 15% personal savings, which you just mentioned. That's plenty on a boat. A lot of yachties justify all this crazy spending all the time, but a lot of them, especially those that never were, like yachting is their first job, they never experienced real life expenses before going to work at sea. They are the ones that don't really know what things really cost.
Yeah.
So I find a lot of my coaching students, the ones that first lived and worked on land and did a land-based career, when they come to sea, they normally do a lot better. But it's the ones that are fresh there from some prestigious boys' school in South Africa that now goes and works on the yachts for their gap year.
Sounds familiar.
They are the ones
like they're targeting someone.
They are the ones that buy 30 pairs of Jordan sneakers and always pay for the bottle service at the clubs. Talking to you, George Pater.
Which is fine. I mean, from my perspective, which is fine. By all means, go. I mean, it sounds quite ironic that I say this. I'm quite sinister, but we're not going to get out of this race called life alive. So also, I'm trying to strike the balance myself of spending more. I think I'm too strict on myself, and I'm also what we get of the in modern corporate is we become a bit complacent, and that I want to stay clear of. And with that, I mean, for example, you've got your day job and you get your salary in per month, and you sort of have this growth curve of life. But some people then actually think, they're irreplaceable. And if there's one thing that last year, and I think this is going to be an extremely interesting year as I work in an AI consultancy as well now, is to see how it's going to impact the workforce. So that's why
the white collar workforce for a change.
Yeah, exactly. And I would go so far as to say an emergency fund. Those things, I remember when I started my investing journey, I followed someone and he said, or she said, 3 months buffer, in case you should find. I'm going to say, I'm going to really be realistic or maybe slightly pessimistic and say 1 year of an emergency fund. Have that. I mean, you've got quite a neat little emergency fund, but it's not for the sake of using it as an emergency. You are already probably at the phase where you can cover that in a sense with your passive income, which is flowing through well. And there will be ups and downs in the stock market. And not only that, and this is just one quick point I want to make, is I never mentioned in my portfolio once about property. Now, you are asking me, you're at the beginning of your financial journey and you're on the yachts. And because you don't have rent in any case, you won't have the figure or cost save from not renting as well, right? So I think property, I've never been a massive believer of property in the context of property investing, sure, especially what you're doing with properties back in South Africa, but we are searching for primary residence. I've done the math. I've done it plenty times. I'm an accountant.
Yeah.
Buying a house is not necessarily a good asset, and the market also fluctuates a lot. So that's my opinion on property.
A primary residence is not an asset. It's a lifestyle expense, and that's fine. But stop treating your fucking house as the biggest asset that you have, because it's not. It has operating expenses. You are paying off the debt on it. The only time your property can be classified as an asset is if it's an investment property. If someone else, some poor other soul, is paying you rent that you use to pay off the interest on your mortgage payments. I am fed up of having everyone tell me my biggest asset is my primary residence. I'm not telling you to not buy one, even though I am fairly certain I'm always going to rent unless I become who's rich in the first world. I'm not going to buy a house, just rent. It gives you flexibility. It often works out cheaper, but that decision changes once we have children, once you find your dream state or your dream province or your dream country. Then you're like, here's where we want to live. Let's get a nice house close to a lovely school. Then it changes. But if you use the Yachting Investor net worth tracker, don't put your primary residence under assets. Please, for the love of God, it is not.
I actually used your tracker last night. It's actually quite good, I would say. And I also have my own tracker, but it's been replaced now. So good stuff. And I think the key word there is house is really, from our perspective, becoming a real emotional decision. And not a financial. Yeah, I can put a spreadsheet in front of my lovely partner's wife's face, but it's not necessarily going to cut it when they've got that vision ahead, of this little kitchen island they want, whatever. So it was a small caveat as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the next question. You and I have both embarked recently on the whole matrimony, haven't you? Believe it or not, both Minnaar Moyes got hitched before the ages of 30. Can you bloody believe it? There were lots of wagers. There were lots of wagers all over the world saying that this will never happen. But we both met fantastic partners. Shout out Krista, shout out Carly. You guys are very good to us and we love you dearly. Let's talk about money in relationships. How is that something you approach? How is that something that you can foresee becoming an issue one day if people don't communicate?
Yeah, tough one. It's probably going to be one of the toughest challenges you face in a relationship if you are not on the same page from the start. As once again, loving papa, loving mama, but from a divorce background as well, I would really say get that contract in place. Just from if
get a fucking prenup.
Yeah, get a prenup. Do get a prenup, because a relationship can change. We don't foresee it and we don't count on it, but do get that prenup. And then obviously communication and open communication. It took us a while, and it took me 2 years for us to engage in this conversation. And I think it was a bit too late. It's only now that we are buying our first asset, looking for that house, which we just talked about. I think that it needs to be literally black and white on paper, but also continuous sessions on how are we feeling, because things change. For example, if I were to work for a startup or build my own business or whatever, and suddenly Krista, my partner, would be the main earner, you have to have open communications regarding your roles within that relationship or whatever, but also the same, not the roles only, your vision and your goals. Don't need to align one-on-one, but I think you have to have a clear vision of what you want to achieve together, because this is for me just as important as your vision with regards to how many kids you want to have or what car you want to drive. By the way, awful asset and those kind of things. But how do you see it? Do you have any tips for me?
Well, I'm even newer married than you are. But I do think, I've been thinking long and hard about this since a young age. I think, like you mentioned, we come from a divorced home and like no biggie, a lot of people get divorced. But money is quite often either the reason or the sour grapes after the divorce. And I've just been thinking so long and hard about it because I've worked very hard to get to where I am, and you build to a certain amount of assets, and then you can't help. There's always that, like, there's always an anxious being inside of everyone that thinks, what if something happens? Like, what if, God forbid, my partner meets someone else, and then we get divorced, and then you never had a prenup. So now not only do you get dumped, you also lose half your fucking net worth. Like, no.
That's awful. No.
Like, no, that's not okay. That's when people like pick up baseball bats and smash cars and shit. So it's also no way to live in fear of these things. You know, you got to have trust, you got to have faith and all those type of things. But it's just so important to be aligned and to have those difficult conversations early on, and rather have the 20 minutes of awkwardness over dinner one night in January 2026 than in 2035, when you're now like enrolling kids into school, you suddenly find out, oh no, for her, they need to go to a private school. And you're like, why? We went to a public school, we're totally fine. Why would we pay 10x the price? So try scenarios, I know no one has a crystal ball and can see where the future goes, but just think logically of the steps you are going to go in life. Are we buying or renting a property? You just said you guys took 2 years to talk about certain things. That conversation could have been had way early on. Then you talk about children. Then you talk about the roles. So if I had to get injured or sick and I no longer work, will you be able to be the breadwinner and the caretaker? Is that something that will be a deal breaker for you? So just kind of plotting out all these scenarios. My plan is to do once a quarter, to do a quarterly review with my spouse. But we can just pour some wine, we can have some canvases going around and do some painting and just be like, hey, what worked for you this quarter on a personal level, on a financial level? What do we want to achieve in the next quarter? And that way things are written down, because what gets measured can get managed. And if you don't write goals down, you're going to forget. And sometimes I'm too analytical, and Carly's like, for fuck's sakes, can we not just enjoy being married? But it's important because you have data to look back on and say, look, this is what we spoke about.
Yeah, we have exactly the same, Charlie. And two key words I want to take out there as well, is, which I might have skipped over, is fair. Staying fair, proportionate to your income, who's paying a bit more rent or not. Or on the other side, because I want to empower my partner to also be financially more literate or savvy, but obviously within the means of their interests in there, because people differ as well. But I'm glad that we have, because it's once again not painting everyone over the same brush, but in a lot of cases in South Africa, it's sort of a tradition. The man zorg and the woman is the caretaker, whatever. I think I've broken that shackles with the fact that it's a Dutch girl, so they are quite more independent in this regard. And so that's good. And that works for us, but definitely a lot of room for improvement. And that's why I set up those sheets. And if it's not measured, it's not.
Well, if it's not measured, it can't be managed.
There we go.
Okay, and then to close out, a few rapid fire questions. What is the next thing you're going to be spending money on except our trip to Turkey?
Hey, speak for yourself. No, we can do that. And there's some nice clinics there. So I'm flying in a few weeks. So the next thing I'll spend on is a ticket to watch Muse in Johannesburg. Yeah.
Epic.
Yeah.
And also buying flowers and presents for our dear mom and grandma.
Of course.
Good lad. Well, Stefan, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think what a banger way to start 2026. Yeah. And mom and dad, love you lots. Thanks for giving us a launch pad. And even though we're both a very long way from home and we miss it dearly, I think we are exactly where we are supposed to be.